So you are saying that to go all the way. Can you say this again?
Yes, I'm saying to go all the way with self-realization. You can't be messing around. It can't just be general. It can't just be philosophical. And you can't even afford to, although this happens, it happens inevitably. You can't afford to stay in the place where you are caught up in struggling with yourself, struggling with your weaknesses, trying to fix your problems, trying to deal with things. Those are all useful, but that's all happening in the mind, or in, as the fourth way says, in the four centers. And this it's the feeling of I. I am trying to resolve this. I am trying to not be so mechanical. I'm trying not to manifest with so much identification. Or my chief weakness. I'm trying to see it and I'm trying to guard against it and not quote unquote be in it. And as though it's this thing outside of us that sometimes we're in. No, it's to go deeper. And then the question is, how do you do that? How do you go deeper then? Okay, you want to go all the way, you want to be more serious. How do you do that? Well, and work with other people, you really turn everything around from one point of view, and you sort of bear the discomfort of being with other people in the sense of how our mechanics rub against one another, our psychological features and tendencies. We're always encountering conflict with others because of our inner conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're stuck in this feeling of I. We don't know it. Our awareness is entangled. That's what identification is. It's entangled in this mind, in this body, in this feeling of I. And then that becomes the pivot around which everything operates, and we experience our life and we experience other people. And getting really serious is getting out of that pivot. Only consciousness can come out. I know that, again, that sounds philosophical, could sound philosophical to many people.
Yeah, in the teachings, the Adida teachings, there's this term self-contraction, and I realized very clearly that there is absolutely no difference between self-contraction concept and identification. It's just a different way to put it that may reveal something more. So it's like the self-contraction, basically. Only consciousness is, as you said, entangled, caught, snagged through and resisting and avoiding. And so consciousness is identified as a something. So this self-contraction, and then we feel like this self-contraction is me. Yeah. And the self-contraction itself is made of consciousness. I mean, it's consciousness tight. It's tight. And that's where, like, I believe a good group, like not just a group where people are friendly and they support one another and they are talking about spirituality, although this is a great benefit of having like friends that are into spirituality and supportive one another. But a good group is based on these teachings, and it's not about friendship, it's not about a clique, it's not about belonging, it's not about being right together. It's basically an artificial laboratory where the pre-existing self-contraction, hot, which is there impacting all our lives all the time, now flares up in this group or in the Sangha, flares up, and now everybody sees it. And I see it too in myself. I see it, but what's different is that we have enough understanding that we know what this is. Because in life, I mean, without a conscious container, when it gets like that, then I was like, hey, I don't like these people. They don't respect me, or I'm cutting off, or I'm upset, or I'm avoiding, or I'm bouncing out. And in a conscious group, the same thing comes up, and we are staying with it, staying to unpack it, to decontract it, to unwind it. And that will be the highest, I mean, one of the biggest roles of the teacher, besides, saying, hey, here is the teaching, here is the map, here is the practice, here is my love. But ultimately, to go all the way, you need to unwind this me contraction. So a skillful teacher would help, I guess, the student see that charged me, and help the person to be more skillful in being aware of it, and how to not keep tightening it by trying to analyze it, by trying to escape it, by trying to make it calmer. I guess the aim to help to see it very well in order to be transcended.
Yes, to see it more and more clearly while realizing yourself as the seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yes, because in the end, it doesn't have to be fought with or fixed. This goes to the Tibetan tradition of it. It will resolve itself of itself by virtue of being seen so clearly, and the awareness that's seeing, realizing itself, and not touching it at all. I've likened it recently to the idea of water in a sponge. If you think of consciousness as like water, and now it's totally absorbed in the sponge. Now you have a wet sponge, and the sponge has a hard time distinguishing between itself and the water. And the water has a hard time distinguishing between itself and the sponge. And this process, awakening process, is not a perfect analogy, but it's now this water is starting to evaporate out of the sponge and start to know itself. And initially it's still it's still in the sponge somewhat, but it's starting to evaporate. And the idea is that at a certain point it can be completely evaporated. And now it's just air molecules. It's just air now surrounding the sponge, looking at the sponge. But when it's in the sponge, when the water's in the sponge, we're literally wringing our hands all the time. We're often fighting with ourselves in the name of the work, in the name of spiritual evolution. And it's the wrong kind of fight until we see that.
Yeah, it's interesting that what we talked just now, it's around the second conscious shock, as we call in the fourth way. So it's becoming aware that there is a seeming crisis. There is a crisis. It's charged. It's suffering in it. And that holds hostage and creates the separate feeling of I. So we are talking about this. And I have a friend who is deep into with Adida teachings, as well as very familiar with Gurdjieff. And then he shared with me this, because like Adidas, he has some, what's the perfect practice? He talks about the perfect practice. And then this friend of mine, he said, he realized that what Adida talks about, the perfect practice, is exactly the same Gurdjieff talks about conscious suffering or intentional suffering. And the perfect practice would be, first of all, to realize that there is suffering, there is some suffering, there's some charge tight that manifests as psychological stuff, emotional stuff, bodily stuff. So first of all, to be aware of it, to be aware of the suffering, and to not try to not to analyze it too long, to not try to make it better, to not calm it, to not avoid it, to not try to escape it, but to consciously feel it spaciously without focusing into it. That will be the perfect practice. Okay, there's suffering and there is consciousness with it without trying to do anything about it. And that will be this conscious, so intent, Gurdjieff was saying the duty in Beelzebub's tales, like he had a special term for it, the partok duty, the engine towards awakening, this conscious labor, conscious effort and intentional suffering. That will be it. There is already suffering, but usually we suffer unconsciously. Analyzing it, making meaning, trying to make it better, escape it, wallow in it, separate from it. But you know, we can't, this is advanced, we can't do this without the first conscious shock, basically. We can't do this, we can't even recognize the suffering if we haven't practiced bringing awareness to less hot things, just having more conscious awareness, attention in a neutral situations.
And then to distinguish between about what we mean by suffering. Because if it's psychological suffering, it can be very hot. As you, to use that term as I think you're using it. And that's different than what the fourth way calls real suffering, where you're suffering an illness or someone close to you is suffering or dying, or severe financial blow in your life, something of this nature, where it's more let's call it human being suffering versus ego suffering.
Yeah.
And so, but in both cases, the same thing applies to not be identified with it. That means you don't have your identity in it, which means the consciousness is now extracted instead of contracted. It's extracting itself. And it's just seeing it. Complete freedom means complete non-identification. As you said, not doing anything. You know, it's funny that is actually the highest thing you could do, is to not interfere. To not interfere, not get entangled with the friction, the suffering. Yes, this requires the purity of non-identification. And a lot of times what we're learning to do is how to be less identified. Identification has two effects. One is the effect it has on consciousness itself. It is the result of consciousness attaching, becoming entangled. That is one description of what identification is. And so it loses awareness of itself, gets caught up, the water gets absorbed in the sponge. But the other thing is the effect it has on the physical body and on the psychological mind. When there's identification, consciousness is contracted, Now this feeling of identity gets stronger, bigger, more dense,
Mm-hmm.
more convinced of itself, and more adamant or more resistant or more um, corrupt or more powerful, more overpowering, something. So it has two sides. And oftentimes, what we're trying to work with is the second side. We're trying to
Mm-hmm.
manage our behavior, the behavior that's the result of consciousness being identified. But ultimately, it's about consciousness
Mm-hmm.
not becoming attached, not contracting. And it can't do that unconsciously.
Yeah, it's tricky because if all that we know is entangled consciousness, all that we know, that is the seeming natural state, which is from point of
Mhm.
view of liberated beings, that's highly unnatural. Uh, like we've been, the fist have been the claw for so many decades or lifetimes that the claw is the natural state. It's all that I know.
Mhm.
But as this claw gradually unwinds and is conditioned, and then it becomes like an open hand, then we see how unnatural the other one was.
Mhm.
So that's why it's a little tricky because we can't access, oh, just untangle yourself, but we with guidance and earnestness, we find a way to be a little bit less caught in it and to find the space around it. Yeah, the space around it. And I guess the more there's this recognition of presence, which is, I agree with you, it's not the end. It's more like the beginning of true work. But as we discover the presence of the presence, now there's something that we can entangle into. But one more thing here, because we
You
are
mean disentangle
disentangled
into, yes.
into
Mhm.
that. But and still staying with this self-contraction identification, one and the same, because I know some people coming to my group, we are using these different terminologies. When I say psychological suffering, now, I mean tortured thinking. There's torture thinking. There is suffering in the thinking. It's the problems in the intellectual center. It's like tortured thinking, problems in the thinking. Emotional suffering, it will be there is a torture in the emotional level, which when there's torture in emotional level, there's almost always torture in the mind too. Um, and then there is a torture at some energetic gut level, unease and all of these things. So all of these things are after. First there is identification. Basically, first there is self-contraction that happened already, and then almost the tortured thinking is one of my teachers now calls resulting frequency. Just like as you said. So when we identified and self-contracted, the thoughts we have are actually lies, are seeing a distorted perspective. When we identify, the emotions we have are lies too. And it's, yeah, I guess it's more advanced practitioner to catch it at the source and to be able to do something or not do something at the source of this.
Mhm. To not let the water out of the spigot to begin with,
Mhm.
to keep that spigot closed or stand guard there. Yes, because most of those lies are self-protective devices of what we could call the ego or your imaginary picture of yourself, your false sense of I, of identity. They pop up to protect me, this feeling of me, and to yes, so this psychological suffering can be used to see that. this is more advanced inner work. Now, instead of giving way to that, giving sway to that, and becoming those reactions, to to watch them inside and see them welling up, see the pressure building, something that wants to rise up and defend my sense of myself. And it can be in a negative form or a positive form, meaning they don't think, these people don't understand me. They're judging me. They don't realize how remarkable I am. Or something. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but as opposed to, I'm a bum, I'm terrible, I deserve this bad treatment, I never do anything well. To see both of those as this protection of the feeling of me.
Hmm. I've really seen this as shocking with, it's easier to see it in others, you know. It's advanced to see this happening live in oneself, the being deluded. I guess when there is identification, one is deluded and thinks lies. So I've seen it with a friend of mine, dear friend of mine, he is fluctuating, and then when he gets identified and in some pain body, he tells me things about this person and that person, and is saying things that are really not true. And in the moment, he really believes that. He really sees that it's true. While at the same time, I know that 2 days ago, the same person will see the other person in a very different way. So out of this self-contraction identification, then this it's believed, I guess, we believe it, and there's deluded perception. There are these lenses, they call even in psychology, like if we haven't processed our trauma, what's trauma? I guess the deep hurtful events, hurtful shock, and identification with it. If one hasn't,
And the negative emotions associated with all of that.
yes, if one hasn't processed more thoroughly through trauma, one sees through trauma lenses, trauma goggles. So I don't see reality as it is, but I'm showing trauma goggles filtered reality. The veils, as they call in the Sufi, the veils that cover the face of the beloved.
I was thinking recently about, not thinking, I was just having perceptions in this, with this image in mind. And that is that presence, not trying to be present, being present is somewhat like looking at yourself in the mirror. But instead of looking into the mirror, of course you do look into the mirror, but keeping your awareness on this side of the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately, though, we go into the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And our life is like that psychologically. Consciousness is always going into the mirror. And it's interesting, this idea, the mind is often depicted as a mirror. It's just a device like a mirror reflecting perceptions of consciousness. They get reflected in this mirror and then they take a certain form. And our consciousness, the consciousness in us is constantly stepping into the mirror instead of just staying on this side, staying home and not touching, not even touching the mirror itself, much less trying to go inside. And then it misconstrues, it thinks that what it sees in the mirror is itself. And it's not. Even when we look in the mirror, all we see is a body. We have an imaginary idea of ourselves as a identity, and we think we're seeing that, but we're not. And what's seeing it on this side of the mirror is just this awareness, looking through the eyes. It's this perception, it's just perceiving all of this, but then it's so accustomed to believing that's what it is. And so life is sort of like that. And this comes back to contraction. As soon as we step into the mirror, the contraction's starting. And now we're becoming. And then we get caught, we get deluded, and now we're literally walking around sort of in a hall of mirrors internally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is all analogy, I know, but you can relate to this from your own experience. But this idea of staying on this side of the mirror, this image, even right now as we sit here, Peter, this person name with a name Peter and a person with the name Mihai are talking and having a conversation. And if they didn't know any better, they would think that that's who they are. They would think that that's all there is. There are these two people having this conversation, as opposed to this presence, this awareness, being cognizant behind on the other side of the mirror, not touching, not involved, not associating as a sense of identity to it, just watching. And not even watching with interest, just watching consciously and not touching and not stepping into this mirror of identity. And this is what it comes down to in the end. And we were going to talk about consciousness today, but we decided we can't just talk about that necessarily. But the reason we're not focusing more on consciousness itself is because we're still fascinated with what's in the mirror. We're still fascinated with our life as this person. And we think that's what we need to resolve. That's what we need to fix. That's what we need to balance. That's what we need to purify. It's that image in the mirror who needs to transform somehow. And that's not it. Conscious transformation is the transformation of consciousness on this on this side of the mirror. Yes. I
Yeah.
mentioned to you earlier, Mihai, a quote, but I'll say it again from Longchenpa. He said, "There's only one resolution, the self-realization of pure awareness." And in the end, that is it. And as many of the teachings say, it's already here. It just doesn't recognize itself on this side of the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And this recognition is this beginning we were talking about. This is the beginning. It starts to recognize itself, looking through the mirror, looking into the mirror. And then can it remain cognizant while all the stuff goes on in the mirror? Can it remain cognizant? And the more it remains cognizant, then something starts to happen to this consciousness, this awareness that can't really be talked about in words so much. It starts to know itself. And it's in another dimension. And it can begin to know that dimension. And I don't say that to make it alluring, but to try to underscore the reality, the fact, the main point that we are not who we appear to be. And that there's this consciousness, this impalpable presence. It is the real. It's the real thing. It's the real deal. And this, the talking and the walking and the worrying and the thinking and the struggling and the dealing with problems that's just it's just this they're both mysteries in a way. But you know what's strange, Mihai, is this self-realization, isn't it? See that it only happens as far as we know, in the human form where there's a psychology. You need a psychology. You need a physical body and you need a psychology to serve as a container, a sort of a dual container, a double container for this awareness so it can realize itself. And yet humanity plays itself out decade after decade, for the most part, without that happening. We serve as part of humanity, we serve some other purpose. This is also not known about and not talked about and not kind of looked at in the face. Why does humanity keep contracting into division, into argument, into war, into corruption, into ruination, into struggle? But it's designed to do that. And our consciousness does the same thing, but it's also designed to not have to do that. It can realize itself on this side of the mirror.
Yeah, these are interesting and very mysterious and important questions that not many teachings, or at least current teachings, they touch. But yeah, this is interesting. In the fourth way, there's this idea that in order to for the conditions to be, in order for self-consciousness to happen, one needs to have certain conditions. One would be that we have these three different floors. There's like the intellectual center, the emotion center, and the body, moving instinctive sex center. These three different departments needs to be. If there's no intellectual center, it's not possible. Although many animals, animals live in harmony with the Tao, and they are not in, they are natural somehow because they don't have intellectual center. Apparently, according to the Gurdjieff and the system, and from observation, it's not possible to reach self-consciousness, being aware of oneself. Another prerequisite Gurdjieff talks about is that even as humans, need to have enough essence and enough personality. Because, we talk here in the West, we are saying we have so much false personality, and people, other ages, they were more simple and more in essence, more natural, more in essence, and too much false personality is problematic. But also Gurdjieff was saying that, but if one is in essence, is just essence, there's no personality, there is no knowledge, it's just a wonderful, raw, organic human animal being. That there's not enough data, there's not enough stuff. So one needs to have the right mixture. And what you're saying is that, the reason why humanity is in division and separation and wars is because of the second state. It's because humanity overall is not in self-consciousness, is not aware of themselves or aware of the truth of reality. So in the second state, in sleep, that's how it goes. It cannot be, one cannot have conscious harmony being in sleep. Yeah. And it seems like there's a function that is okay. There's a function of humanity, almost all humanity being in spiritual sleep. Still humanity has a function. However, there's a possibility from the divine that you can go to the third state and fourth state, awakening, and now that also has a function. There's definitely in the other direction, there's more chances. There's the chances to find some peace and more true happiness and more enjoyment. We want happiness and enjoyment of life. That's not really truly possible in being asleep.
You mentioned animals. It's curious that they are in harmony with nature in this way. And if you took psychology away, if you took psychology out of the human design, out of the human vehicle, we would probably be much more in harmony with nature. But you put in this thing called a psychology. Now, because animals also get identified, for example, but the identification manifests in a very simple way, just through the body. But for us, when it manifests through a human psychology, which is really an unknown. There's so much we don't know how the mind works and what that even means to have a psychological world, what the psychological world is, what comprises it, how it came to be, why it operates the way it does. But we can study it from this point of view of identification. What happens to our psychology when we are more identified? And then what happens to what's happening in our psychology when we're less identified. This is a worthwhile study. And you can look at these from the point of view of the consciousness of awareness. When we're more identified, the awareness in us is not conscious of itself. As I was saying earlier, on this side of the mirror, it's now entangled, it's stepped in, it's caught up in. And this identity becomes more identified. You could say it becomes more and more dense. And then when we're less identified, it's almost as though like you were saying, the claw opens up. And now it starts to release this consciousness to know itself independently.
Yeah, and this now stretching the metaphors, when the hand is in a claw, it is suffering, it's painful, and it's not useful as a hand. It cannot do what
Yes.
it cannot play piano, it cannot caress a baby, it cannot take care of stuff. So, and then the hand gets unclawed and reconditioned to be not tight, then it becomes useful, more useful to the body. And then it's less attention on itself. Because if it's a claw, it's like, oh, that's hard. But when it is not a claw, it's naturally at peace, and it's being used for a bigger purpose. As a claw, it bangs itself on things. Gets snagged.